I think coming into the modern day, meaning like the last 10 years, the way things have popped out, and it's really been the last 5. I think the game has been flourishing, but it has been largely, kept from view by poor and inadequate number of media opportunities and poor coverage. The quality has been there. And then when Caitlin Clark came in, her play really shone a spotlight on college and now pro, and people are going, wow, look at this game. Look at this college game. Look at this pro game. It's wonderful. It's terrific. And so I think she's been a catalyst to really get people to see what we've been seeing for a long time.
Their book, Shattering the Glass, The Remarkable History of Women's Basketball, stands as the definitive history of the sport, combining extensive basketball research with dozens of oral history interviews. It's available now at your local bookstore. We welcome Pamela Grundy and Susan Shackelford onto Hoopsology. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Before we jump into the book, we have a bit of a tradition on our show. We would delve into basketball culture. What makes the game of basketball so great and why it stands out from other sports? So take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
Well, I'm going to go with a double thing on that. I got particularly into basketball, not just because I moved to North Carolina where it's a big deal, but I was hired to do an exhibit on basketball for the 1994 Final Four, which happened to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the thing that was cool about basketball, we called the exhibit the most democratic sport because basketball is a sport that everybody played. Men, women, Black, white, Latino, Native American, rural, urban, everybody played. So if you did a basketball exhibit, you could include everybody in it. And that also included my very favorite basketball moment. We had TVs in there. It was a big exhibit. We had all these TVs. And one of the TVs, UNC was playing in those finals. And instead of having our video, we tuned the TV to the game and got to see Charlotte Smith take that shot. Oh my God. 0.3 seconds left. Of course, we had all this stuff about Michael Jordan and how he had shot the final winning basket, but I think he had like 2 seconds as opposed to 0.3 seconds. So that was just an amazing moment. And that really is the combination of being in that exhibit with all those players and then seeing Charlotte Smith, a woman, just make that amazing shot. That was really cool.
And how about you, Susan?
Well, my moments in basketball really go back to my childhood. And the one thing that I remember getting a kick out of when I was a kid was that my dad was a basketball coach. That was just wonderful. And he would take me out and show me things. Well, one thing he showed me when I was in about 3rd or 4th grade was how to shoot a hook shot. Well, I just thought I was the greatest thing that had ever lived once I got that hook shot. And I used it all the way through elementary school, and I was kind of tall anyway, and did it as a center. And the kids would kind of go, "Wow, where did you learn that?" And then when I was in high school, I was a guard because I didn't grow a whole lot, and I would actually drive to the basket and drop, step, and turn and hook the ball. So I just kind of get a kick out of that personal memory. And I want to say one other thing. Pam mentioned that Charlotte Smith shot from 1994 that won the title for UNC. I was actually at that game, and it was phenomenally exciting. I was maybe 10 rows up, and I like hugged this complete stranger um, right beside me, and he hugged me equally strong back. And it was just one of those emotional moments in the game.
And of course, Susan is a UNC grad, and I went to grad school there. So we do have a special place in our heart for UNC, especially the women.
Yeah, just such a rich basketball tradition there. Jumping into the book, we interview a ton of authors, and we always like to delve into the creative process from beginning to end. So for both of you, can you just delve into the origin story of this book when you're first either come up with the idea or pitch the idea to putting words to paper to seeing it come to full fruition? What was that process like?
Well, the beginning is fun. We love to tell the story. I'd done a lot of sports history. I'd done this exhibit. I'd done some stuff on women's basketball. I was teaching at Davidson College. Actually, I was teaching Steph Curry's alma mater, and I was teaching history of sports. And I taught it three times, and I realized there was no good book on women's sports that you could assign to undergraduates. There were lots of things on men's sports, but there was nothing that there was some high level, academic things, but nothing that was just really something undergraduates would want to read. And so I thought, well, what we need is a history of women's basketball, because as I said earlier, it covers everybody. You can do a history of women's basketball, starts in the 1890s, right when men starts, come on up through the present. So I thought this was a great idea, but I didn't want to do it. So I tried for a number of years to convince other people to do it. I would see people, I was like, hey, you should write the history of women's basketball. That would be great. But I never could convince anybody. And then, lo and behold, Susan moves across the street from me. And I knew her because I'd interviewed her in the past because she played high school basketball, and then she was a sports writer and had been the first female sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel at UNC back in the 70s. She never says this, but I love to say that because I think it's really cool. And one day it hit me, Susan and I could write this book together. I could do the history part. She could do the present day part. So one day she was out in the street and I walked over and I said, hey, Susan, how about we write the history of women's basketball? And take it away, Susan. Tell your part.
Yeah, yeah. Pam just mentioned this. We're neighbors, and I thought, huh, this sounds really, really good. Because I still wrote sports, even though my business was broader than that. I wrote on a number of things, but I loved doing sports. I had been a full-time sports writer at one point. So I got so excited just standing there in the street. I said, Pam, I'm a little too excited about this. I need to sleep on it just to make sure that I'm thinking through just quickly what this might impact my business and, life. And she said, oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. So of course the next morning, bright and early, I'm like, okay, let's get started. Let's figure out how we want to do this. So yeah, and it's been a great collaboration, really wonderful collaboration. I think the two of us see storytelling very similarly. We want it to be through people, and we want it to be through stories and their stories and the stories of teams, and trying to make our points that way. So I think very early on we agreed on that, and we were able to find stories that fit the narrative of what we wanted to say.
And I think the thing is, yeah, sometimes you think, oh, people writing a book together, it's going to be really hard. But actually, the beauty of it was I really knew the history better than the present, which is why I was reluctant to write the book on my own. And Susan knew the present just like personally. She had lived part of it. She had been writing about it. And so essentially what would happen, I'd write chapters and give them to her. She'd write chapters and give them to me. And then we would edit and we would talk about what needed to be done. And as she said, we were really always on the same page. So the book turned out so much better than it would have if either of us had written it on our own.
Yeah, I agree with Pam on that. And I think one of the things that helped us was that we both had journalism backgrounds, and we had worked in the media. So we had a similar sense of storytelling and
style.
Yeah, in style. So we didn't really have to jump those hoops. The hoops we did jump were really about what's the best way, and there was always so much to choose from.
Yeah.
What is the best way to tell this? And so we would mishmash around, and we'd always land on a common feeling about it and go after it.
And always when you're writing, I mean, the key thing is, especially with something like a book, what are you going to cut? You write all this stuff and then you're like, well, it's too long. It's going on. People are going to get bored or tired. So we got to take something out. And, what do you take out? Because everything's amazing. And so that was one of the discussions of what are these stories, not necessarily the greatest player or, we weren't into that, but we were, what are the players and the teams that tell the story that we think is important historically.
Awesome. It really sounds like it was fate that that this book was to be made. I wanted to ask, we've had the discussion with other authors we've interviewed where even in the NBA, like in the 70s, for example, and before that, is very difficult for authors to find history and source material in some cases for the items that they were presenting in their books. And I would imagine there maybe were some similar struggles, especially considering this book goes back so far, even to the 19th century when talking about the sport. Were there any challenges to finding the information that you were looking for?
That's a very good question. If you're, as a historian, you kind of know where the sources are. For example, many people look to Cinda Berenson from Smith College as the, beginner of this. She's the one who really put a separate system of women's rules into place, became very important. And Smith College is a very wealthy college, and they have a fabulous archive with everything Cinda Berenson ever wrote. So that's, one thing. In Iowa, of course, Iowa basketball has been amazing since the late 20s when they started the women's tournament. And so there's a lot of stuff that may not be there's some in newspapers, but then there are school yearbooks. School yearbooks are amazing. So much of this is school stuff. And so, I mean, what young people write in their yearbooks. There's a great one here in Charlotte. One of the things we do is link basketball to, to larger movements in history, and particularly to efforts by women to expand their public roles. So right after the suffrage amendment passes, here in Charlotte, there's a group of young women and they start a basketball team. And at the bottom of their picture in the yearbook, they say this is the first year we've had basketball. Man's age has been heretofore, but now woman's age is coming in athletics as well as in politics. So you just see those comments. So you can find stuff. And then Susan might want to talk about our oral histories, because that's another really important way to do stuff.
Yeah, I think with the modern day folks, so to speak, Title IX forward, roughly, we were able to find people that could speak to their stories, and the questions that Pam and I would put out there about how the game linked to larger things. So we did a tremendous number of oral interviews with coaches and players, administrators, on and on and on. And that was really not hard to do for our first edition, which came out in 2005. And you can see it in the bibliography. And then when we decided a few years ago, wow, so much has happened, let's do this update, we started reaching out to some similar level people, top folks, in leagues and coaching and playing. Well, now, because the game has expanded so much, I mean, they have little fiefdoms around them, in terms of trying to reach them. We were able to get some of them. Muffet McGraw, great example. Kim Mulkey, great example. But some people just, they wouldn't let us through it was like a wall. And part of it being historians, we're not in the daily media all the time. We're not on a network. We don't have our own pod, that kind of thing. So we're coming from a different angle than they're used to. So we had to be very resourceful on this update to get what we needed. And I feel like we did. Many of them have a lot of wonderful writings that they've made personally, and it captures their ideas about things. So I think we were able to round it out just a little bit differently with the update.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you have, you just do have less access. Obviously, they have 1 million people looking for their time, and they've got to make choices. I do want to shout out to Simone Augustus, who took a chunk of time to talk with us, and who's, again, an interview gets you to all these levels of detail that you're never going to get in written stuff. And so we really appreciate her doing that. But the greater interest and greater publicity around women's basketball meant that although it was harder to reach people, they did have more out in the public, essays and interviews. And so there was a lot more to draw on than you would have been able to draw on like back in, say, the 50s, where we had some great interviews and where the sports writing was just, oh, they won this and they won that. And then, any comments are super formulaic. So, things change in different ways. And I think we worked well with both situations.
I wanted to ask both of you with women's basketball, and this might be a long question, so I apologize, but just the totality of the history of the game, what are some things negatively and positively that stand out to you in terms of the evolution from when you conducted your research when putting this book together to now, where women's basketball, it's really gone in several directions, 3-on-3, to the international expansion of the game, to just the game linked to a new technology, social media. What has really stood out to you just in terms of charting this research? Was there anything that surprised you just in terms of how the game has evolved in a different direction it has gone over the years?
Wow. That's a great question, Justin. I think that the way the game has evolved over the years is really like a roller coaster. And the people riding the roller coaster, the players, the coaches, have all been excited about this game and for the most part capable. But our culture hasn't always seen them that way. And so there were limits at times. And in our book, you can see the times when the limits kind of push down what the
Well, Susan
opportunities
seems
were
to
for women.
cut out a little
And
bit,
you
but
can
yeah,
see
in the book, what you
at other
see
times when the
is
culture broadly
opportunities
had a
and
greater
limits
view of women because
change
what they
along
do,
with larger,
women's basketball generally
larger
endured.
ideas about what women
So that was
can
just
and
really
should do. And those have changed dramatically. It's not like, oh, women were always expected to be in the home, and not playing basketball. In the 20s, there's a new, like I said, women's suffrage. You get the flappers. There's a whole different idea of who women are and where they should be in public and what they might be able to do. And that's a really good time for women's basketball. On the other hand, the 1950s, post-war, when it becomes very conservative, real strong divisions between who's a man and who's a woman. And that's actually the time when females come to dominate cheerleading. Before originally it was a man's sport, back in college football where it was only men. And then it became kind of a co-ed thing. And it's really in the 50s when men play sports and women cheer for them. So you just see all these different, of course, Title IX comes as part of the women's liberation movement. So you see lots of things. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Susan.
No, I think Pam just gave you great, excuse me, great examples of the kind of roller coaster point I was trying to make. She really gave you a concrete idea of what we saw, and we have captured. I think coming into the modern day, meaning like the last 10 years, the way things have popped out, and it's really been the last 5. I think the game has been flourishing, but it has been largely, kept from view by poor and inadequate number of media opportunities and poor coverage. The quality has been there. And then when Caitlin Clark came in, her play really shone a spotlight on college and now pro, and people are going, wow, look at this game. Look at this college game. Look at this pro game. It's wonderful. It's terrific. And so I think she's been a catalyst to really get people to see what we've been seeing for a long time about it. And so the investment and marketing dollars are beginning to flow in more and raising that visibility of those media opportunities. And so that's in general, and I'm sure Pam can expound more if you're interested, because there are some more subtleties that we think have pushed the game forward here in the last few years.
Well, and I think one of the things that we really look at that's very interesting, and I mentioned Title IX. Of course, Title IX wasn't just about sports. It was also about giving women opportunities in all sorts of areas, like being allowed into engineering classes, which sometimes they weren't, really encouraging them. And what we're seeing today is that a lot of women who went to school in this early Title IX period, who often played the early versions of women's sports, are now in these powerful positions where they can decide where their marketing dollars are going to go, where they can make this kind of choice. And they're the people who know how good women's sports is, know how, just how good they are and how important it is to have women in the spotlight. And so that's been behind some of the new coverage, some of the new investment in the sport. And so that's a longer term historical development. I mean, you could almost say, you elevate some women or whatever group you want to talk about. I mean, eventually it lifts everyone, because you get these new ideas at the pinnacles of power in our society.
I would be curious to have both of you expand on some of the other subtleties. I mean, I think, Susan, you said it well there, where Caitlin Clark is definitely a catalyst, has brought a lot of people in, but it's well understood, I think, with anyone with an understanding, even a small understanding, like maybe my understanding of the history of the sport, that there was a lot set in place before Caitlin Clark got on the scene. Can you explain some of those other subtleties that you mentioned that maybe helped us arrive at this moment where it does seem like women's basketball has had an explosion in these past 5 years?
Well, I think just to add on to Pam's point about the women in power positions, I think that subtlety, which is becoming more known now, has been major, because they can say yay and nay to projects. And they also have been rooting around and saying, why is this stuff not happening? Why is it not happening? And then they start partnering with people. But I think the other subtleties that I'd point to is, I think there's a tremendous passion and sustenance among these women who play. They love it, and they work at it, and they want it to be a better game. They're constantly they don't take time off, and they've realized they sort of have two tracks they run down. They run down the playing track all the time, and they run down the marketing track all the time. And I think they're very conscious of it. I think one of the first players since our last book that had such a great grasp of it was Candace Parker. Candace was a star at Tennessee, all kinds of accolades there, and then came out after 3 years to go pro. Well, that was, I'm not sure that, I think it had happened once or twice before. There's not the money incentive to come out, but there were reasons why she came out that were additional to just salary, which, Pam, you might want to elaborate on the Candace story.
Well, I think, a lot of these players, I mean, even these amazingly paid NBA players, I mean, there's more money in endorsements than there is in salary, particularly for someone like the WNBA. And so Candace had become a national figure. She'd won that slam dunk contest, and she did, right, Susan? Susan's like expert on this. And so she'd been known since high school, and she was just a salesperson. She was really good at it. And so it made sense for her to come out, to go to a big market like LA, and to be part of that. I do want to jump back to one other piece that I think was tremendously important that we talk about in the book, which is the 1996 Olympic team. And this was a moment where a lot of people involved in the sport said, look, lots gone on. We've had these great stars. We've had these great, we've had these great NCAA tournaments. We had Cheryl Swoops. We had Charlotte Smith's great shot. We had Rebecca Lobo and the Huskies, the UConn Huskies. And so they're like, we can do something out of this. And so they put together this team of the best players in the country. And they spend an entire year going around the country playing games. They never lose. And then they go to the Olympics and they win the gold medal, which women hadn't been doing with consistency prior to that. And so that creates this huge interest around women's basketball, and they actually start not one, but two professional leagues. There's so much interest in doing that. And though the ABL ends up not being able to sustain itself, the WNBA, in part with some subsidies from the NBA, whose leaders know that it makes sense to have women playing, because there's lots of women out there who would, go to games or buy, there's a lot of possibility in building a market, not just from men, but among women who like the game. And so the persistence of that, the fact that the WNBA, unlike the earlier women's leagues, was with us, has been with us for more than 25 years, has really established this group of women who are so good and so committed that they really have been able to be in a place where, sometimes more than others, but, an institution in a way.
Yeah. I agree with Pam that Olympic team, then the pro team flowing out of it, and then the WNBA being able to sustain. And they've had plenty of ups and downs, particularly in the early to mid 2000s. But they have hung in there, and they have worked their model. They've tweaked it. The NBA, has stuck by them. And I think that has just been a lot of persistence, and it has been almost like Pam's saying, it's created an institution.
With that, I want to ask both of you, with the new labor negotiations coming up soon for the WNBA, and with the WNBA gaining its new television deal, there's been a lot of discussions in terms of the future of the league, whether the WNBA should maybe part ways with the NBA. I think that's rather foolish. There's just so much linked between both leagues in terms of just how both teams work together, just with the training facilities, the cross promotion. Where do you see the next evolution of the W specifically into the future? What are things that are going to take the league and sort of speak to the next level in terms of guiding its players, in terms of gaining more benefits, and just the respect to their counterparts that they deserve, and also as a growth of a league to itself? What are kind of the benchmarks do you see the W that need to hit in terms of maintaining itself and growing in the future?
Well, I'm going to take an example of Seattle. One of the brand new nice training facilities is for the Seattle Storm. Now, the Seattle Storm is not connected to an NBA team. They were started by the Supersonics, but then the Supersonics left Seattle, went off to Oklahoma, doing pretty well on the whole. But the Storm was so popular among people in Seattle that a group of women bought it and kept it in Seattle, and have been able to build that market and build all of that independently of the WNBA, and then to decide they're going to put this, put in this beautiful practice facility. So there are teams that are making it on their own. I mean, I think the NBA is very helpful. I don't think they should just toss it off, but they are making it on their own, and I think that's a really positive sign. I don't know, Susan, maybe you want to talk to some of the other parts of the question.
Well, I was I was thinking about what I've been witnessing, and Pam and I've talked about. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of money now flowing in to the league from an ownership perspective. You know, the cost of these franchises were just several $1 million in the late uh, teens. You know, like 2018, 19, and then. And now the new number, based on the Cleveland bid, which we'll probably make, is 250 million. So to me, what this is saying is that we've got people with money wanting to be in this league, and I think as we get more people that have that level of participation, I think we're going to see improvements in all kinds of benefits for the players, which have steadily improved but could improve faster. Number one being salary. The salary is just not anywhere commensurate with what they deserve. And I think that has got to happen. I also think the pressure of some of these other leagues, like Unrivaled, last summer for the debuted, you know, they one of the things they came in with a big media contract, and out of that they were able and sponsorships, and they were able to flow tremendous salaries out of that for those players for what 2.5 months of play. So I'm thinking this this money aspect is really going to float the boat at a higher level, and we're going to see some of the inequities improved.
I'm wondering, given the timeline, since we're on the WNBA, with where the start point was and where we are now and kind of the boom that we've seen, I mean, is from what you're seeing, is it comparable to like a 1980s NBA where you have kind of narratives from the NCAA causing a boom in the professional side of things? As we all well know, I mean, the NBA was struggling in the 70s before this golden age hit. Are we seeing kind of a similar golden age in the WNBA right now?
Well, I sure hope so. You know, you hope that's the case. But again, one of these challenges, and this goes back to women's history, is you don't know what's ahead. I think it still is dependent. There are a lot of people out there now who just love these strong women playing this game in amazing ways. I love it. I love to watch them. Um, and and you have, people in power, and we talked about this in corporations and such, who also love it, who also see the value in it. But we know from looking at history that can change. It's more precarious, I would say, than with men's. And you can kind of see that now in the present day, where I would say that strong women at the national level, at the highest ranks of government, are not being held up as being significant or and so, the question is, how do you work with that? How do you ensure that this becomes, I think it is to some degree a golden age, that it stays that way? I think that to me is the real question.
No, totally agree. And to that point, can you talk about with Title IX and this political climate under attack by just the current government? What are those safeguards do you think other leagues, not only the WNBA, but the NWSL, Athletes Unlimited, you mentioned Unrivaled, are there safeguards in place, and even with the college game, at at collegiate athletics as well, to maybe protect itself from a maybe uncertain future in terms of women's sports?
Well, Justin, I think with Title IX, I think if they come for it and they start, trying to mitigate it, and the girls aren't getting opportunities or fair opportunities, I think the parents and the communities just have to speak up. They've got to make their voices known, because that's, I mean, in the political climate we are now, it's pretty much hands are on everything, pretty much from Washington. And I think a bunch of angry parents would not really be what any administration really wanted. And I think with Title IX, that's probably what it would take, is those parents speaking up for their
Yeah, because one of
their
the
girls to make it
challenges,
a good
I mean,
school.
it's fine if there's legislation. You
Do you say
you
legislation?
know, parents. Yeah, I was saying, you have legislation, but it doesn't do any good unless it's enforced. You know, Congress can pass all the legislation they want, but unless somebody says, if you don't do this that we told you to, this is what's going to happen, then, you know, people can just ignore it. And that actually happened with Title IX for a while. And you can see it going up and down as to whether an administration wants to enforce it. But I think, like Susan said, you know, if you have an administration that is not interested in stepping in and making sure that things are actually fair, and I think it's reasonable to say this administration is not, then you need pressure from other places, like from the parents, like from the fans, you know, to ensure that colleges and high schools, because it applies to all public schools, um, school, you know, basically all schools, that they do the right thing. You got to figure out how else to do that.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, wanted to follow up on Unrivaled that we mentioned earlier. Um, do you feel that, you know, comparing that to the ABL in the 90s, I mean, this league as it's set up right now has a lot more staying power. Obviously, in the ABL was not around for very long after kind of the initial big sparks when it started.
I think, Matt, that's a really interesting thing to think about, because the ABL lasted about 3 years. They came in with the best salaries, and other than the top players recruited by the WNBA to be their signature players, like Lisa Leslie, Rebecca Lobo, on and on, the top players went to the ABL because the salaries were better. Um, but what the ABL lacked was the sponsorship clout and the media clout that the NBA had running the WNBA, and they could not be seen. Their games, their TV contract just really, really devolved. The first year was not too bad, but then it just kind of got worse and worse and worse. And it just killed them. You know, if you don't have a good TV contract and good placement, good times, then your sponsors don't want to sign on because they're not being seen. So it's a vicious circle. You know, bringing it up to Unrivaled, I think they're a different animal. I think they're a 3-on-3 played in the off season of the WNBA that helps players stay in the United States if they want to, and not have to play overseas. But here's the really big piece: this league was created as a media first league. They signed a tremendous media contract to have their games on TV at good times, like all through the season, and to pay their players extremely well for that short period of time. And the ABL did not have that clout to offer that to their players, and that's why their ship sunk. Um, Unrivaled came in with and solved that problem on the front end. And the head of the league, Alex Basil, I believe is his name. I've not met him, so I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. He has been in marketing for years. He knows the women's game. He's married to Nafisa Collier. So I think they had a knowledge base and connection base, and then put together a plan that's going to ensure their survival. So
And I think that gets back to, I mean, what makes a league successful? It's not necessarily how well people play. You can be playing fabulous basketball, and if no one has the opportunity to see it, then there's no opportunity. There's often criticism of women's basketball and the WNBA as well. Nobody wants to watch it. And so that's why, because they're not any, these guys. I won't say any further, but it's mostly guys, who's like, well, they don't play like the NBA. Who wants to watch it? That's why they can't make money, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, once you have the opportunity, you love those t-shirts, everyone watches women's basketball, you have to get on TV or people can't see you if you're not on TV. If you're not in a good slot, of course, nobody's going to watch you because they can't find you or they've gone to bed or, they don't get up that early. And so that's tremendously important. And at the same time, this corporate sponsorship. I mean, the NBA is not wealthy because they sell a ton of tickets. That's not the major source of income. That's not the major source of presence in the market. It's TV and it's corporate sponsorships. And so you just have to get to what's great about women's basketball now is through a variety of means, quality, getting different people making decisions, they are now starting to get the TV and the corporate sponsorships that let people see how great they are and, how cool it is to actually watch them.
Are we at a point now where there is that recognition of value and investment now for the future growth? Because it seems natural with the talent that's out there and everything. I mean, what you would presumably like to do is just expand to more markets. So, along the lines of what you're saying there, Pamela, I mean, you can get more eyes on the sport, and then the the contracts come as far as media rights and those kinds of things. You can work at a similar model with the NBA. Do you think there is that awareness of the opportunity with this league now, still in its early stages?
I think it is. I think people realize that these early dollars, so to speak, that are coming in on this uptick, that they have tremendous growth potential. The entities they're investing in, that's been well documented by a number of people who are much more savvy about the economics of sports than I am, and it has been discussed. And I really believe that that early money is going to do really well. And then and we're still in a fairly early phase that people want to just go ahead and make their investments. They're going to see tremendous growth. And, people that invest, that's what they're looking for. If they've really got deep pockets, it's either long-term growth and or write-offs. But I think there's tremendous trajectory here.
And you just have to look at how many cities have bid for the expansion teams. Our city, Charlotte, bid for it. I mean, they had a WNBA team. They lost it because there wasn't support, but now there's a bid in, to get it back. And there's a lot. I don't know, Susan, do you know how many cities bid on these? I mean, it was a lot.
I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say it's at least a half a dozen that are floating out there to try to get the next incarnation, with Cleveland seeming to be the leader. From what I hear, it's been hard to get information on this. I don't quite know why. I do know a lot of it. People looking to buy franchises will hold it close to the vest to a degree, and then the league does, because they're trying to make up their mind about what they're going to do. So yeah, I mean, there's just tremendous interest. They added a new team this year, the Valkyries, as y'all know, and then they're adding two more next season. It's going to be Portland and Toronto. So really, the next team that gets added would be 28, I believe, at the earliest.
And I think the thing is, there are enough fabulous players to add teams without diluting the quality. I mean, before the Valkyries, there were 128 spots. I mean, there are more than 128 amazing players out there. And so, yeah, I think we're at a point where you can, unlike maybe a few other sports I could name, where you can expand without, you have this expansion team that just lags along sadly for a dozen years before they can pick it up. I mean, the Valkyries are doing really well. I mean, they're an expansion team, but they are playing really well because there's that many good players.
Yep. I think also from purely just the investment side, even if I didn't care for the sport at all, I would think it's appealing that the league remains linked to the NBA. To me, it feels like it's got the infrastructure behind it that it's too big to fail. So I would say, get in before the boom continues even further, and you'll make, right, Susan, you mentioned the growth in value is already, it sounds like, over tenfold from initially when these franchises were purchased. It seems like it's only going up. We see the value of NBA franchises, even if it's a while before there's an equal value, it's still going to be tremendous growth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yep, totally agree. Susan, Pamela, thank you for joining the show. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, if you have any upcoming projects, and anything else you want our audience to be aware of?
Well, we do a lot on LinkedIn. We post a lot of stuff. We have a website, shatteringtheglassbook.com. Just Shattering the Glass and then book.com. So that's a place where we do blogs and other sorts of things. Our schedule for appearances. And of course, you can buy the book. You can ideally from an independent bookstore, but you can also buy it on Amazon. It's published by UNC Press. It's, it's everywhere. So try that, Susan.
Yeah, I think Pam really summarized it well. I would just emphasize our website because you can get all the details about where to find the book, but beyond that, you can get commentary from us on a bunch of basketball topics that are germane to what's happening right now. Very timely, and it's a great opportunity. They're quick takes, 100 to 400 words, great photos. We've got all these
They have such great photos.
So anyway, I think people that enjoy the sport would enjoy going in there. One other thing I would say, we have also an audio version of this book.
Yeah.
And so anybody that would prefer that, when you're out walking or you're doing your workout, we love the audio version too. So
Yeah, it's available on all platforms. And on the website, too, if you poke around a little, we have lots of historical tidbits. So if you need a little something for your, to go with anything, y'all as well, if you need a little women's basketball history tidbit, you poke around, you'll find a whole list of really cool people and events that are just lots of fun. Women's basketball is so much fun because the women doing it have always been, a little out of the box, always been excited about being out of the box because, you're playing a sport like this, you're doing something new. It's a lot of fun. It's just great.
yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Enjoyed it.